So these two maps show the extent of the Russian advances in Donetsk toward the city of Pokrovsk, which is southwest of Bakhmut. Now, as it stands, just about 3 days ago, Reuters reported that Russia now sits approximately less than 15 miles away from the city of Pokrovsk, which lies at an intersection of roads and a railway that makes it an important logistics hub point for the Ukrainian military in the east of Ukraine. In this map here, you will see what is called Ukraine's last operational defensive belt. It contains 4 main fortress cities: Konstantinivka, Druzhivka, Kramatorsk, and Sloviansk. Chasiv, which the Russians have been marching towards for a couple of weeks now, is a key stronghold that Russia wants to capture, as it would enable Russian forces to attack into the Ukrainian defensive belt that I just spoke about, and potentially disconnect Konstantinivka from the other cities in that defensive belt. Now, the ISW, the Institute for the Study of War, which is a very Western leading American think tank, confirmed that Russian threats to Druzhivka and Konstantinivka are very operationally significant, since these fortress cities help form the backbone of the Ukrainian defense in the Donetsk Oblast. Now, news has just broken out in Western and Ukrainian media of another major breakthrough by the Russian army towards the logistics hub of Pokrovsk. So today I'm going to cover a few articles that detail this Russian breakthrough towards that logistics hub. And then I'm going to talk about another article which, despite its misleading title, also confirms what I have been repeatedly talking about on this channel. And that is that the Ukrainian army is currently in the gradual stage of collapsing front lines. The $60 billion aid package recently approved by the US Congress has so far proven elusive, because according to all the reports I read, reports coming from the front line, objective reports, there has been no improvement in the ammunition shortages for the Ukrainian armed forces. And thus, it seems that, as I've said before, that military aid package was really just for morale boost. And if I am correct, and I do think I am, then I am increasingly confident in my theory that we are very soon approaching the sudden stage of collapse of the Ukrainian defense lines in the Donbas region. It will either be a sudden collapse, or, as I stated in my previous video, a total surrender to the Russian armed forces. So the first article is from the Daily Telegraph, and it's a very important article because I interpret it as evidence that the Russians are focused primarily on demilitarization as opposed to territorial gain. It shows how they continue to adapt their strategy to focus primarily on attriting the Ukrainian forces rather than seeking any major territorial gains. So the UK-based newspaper reports that Moscow's strategy focuses on targeting the poorly organized and vulnerable units in the Donetsk region. Worse yet, this disorganization in Kiev's army has led them to, and I quote, jam their own drones in the sky as Russia capitalizes on poor decision-making to advance almost 4 miles toward the key garrison town of Pokrovsk. Yuri Butusov, a widely known Ukrainian journalist who, if memory serves correct, also broke the news that Ukraine needs to mobilize about 30,000 men per month to make up for the over 500,000 killed Ukrainians on the battlefield. He reported that Russian forces were deliberately targeting poorly organized and vulnerable troops in a punch towards Pokrovsk. A lack of coordination between Ukrainian units and electronic warfare jammers meant a significant number of our own drones had been destroyed. A crucial problem is the lack of a single competent authority for all drone and electronic warfare forces, which continue to be used in a scattered and uncoordinated manner, he wrote. Drone units are assigned tasks without regard to tactical and technical capabilities. He noted, and this is interesting here, he noted that unusually, the Russian infantry assault groups were no longer targeting vulnerable lines of defense. Instead, they were focusing on brigades with the weakest command, core control, and cohesion. Now that statement right there tells me that the Russians are less focused on attacking defense lines to gain territory, but are focusing on the poorly organized brigades so that they can better attrit the Ukrainian forces. When such a poorly managed brigade is attacked, it cannot hold even a narrow line. Therefore, and this is key, all replenishment and reserves are used to reinforce the weakest units that suffer the greatest losses. This of course prevents the creation of significant tactical reserves that would have time for additional training, or that would be able to equip the second and third lines of defense. I am no military expert, but when I read this tells me that the Russians are focusing on creating mini cauldrons along the front lines, where the Ukrainian army command is the weakest, and then sucking in their reinforcements so that they can demilitarize them. And this to me is a major reason why I stand by my theory that the Ukrainian armed forces are going to collapse sooner rather than later. The Russian strategy is making it impossible for Ukraine to train and mobilize sufficient forces in time to replenish losses at key points on the front line in Donetsk. And the effectiveness of this Russian strategy is seen by the recent breakthroughs in Donetsk, and especially so in the attendant casualties that are inflicted on the Ukrainians. A report by authoritative Ukrainian deep state website, which maps changes on the battlefield, said the operational and tactical situation became critical over the weekend. It blamed the chaotic retreat by a Ukrainian infantry unit that the country's battle-hardened 47th Mechanized Brigade was sent to stabilize. Russia's main line of advance is on a railway line that runs through the recently captured village of Pokrovsk toward Pokrovsk. Small Russian assault groups are fighting their way up to the tracks and able to conceal themselves in vegetation when they become too bogged down by Ukrainian defense forces to continue advancing. According to the Kiev Independent, Ukraine military admitted the situation was tense and difficult and claimed that Russia is expending significant forces to break through toward the key logistics hub in Pokrovsk. Newsweek said that Russians are advancing toward Pokrovsk in two directions, pushing south from the Donetsk village of Lozuvatsky and north from Prohers. Prohers is immediately south of Lozuvatsky, and both settlements sit east of Pokrovsk. In the past 7 days alone, the Russian forces advanced around 4 miles toward Pokrovsk and the town of Moreoever, just east of Pokrovsk. If the Russians enter Moreoever, they can fire directly on Pokrovsk. This assessment was confirmed by the Institute for the Study of War. And here's how the Ukrainian journalist Butusov described it. Pokrovsk and Moreoever are the last area of defense before the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. The enemy is close. The situation is critical, as the pace of the enemy's advance is alarming. Meanwhile, all this is happening on the battlefield, somewhere at a secret military base in some alternate universe. Ukraine's commander-in-chief, General Syrsky, is trying to convince the Guardian newspaper that he is confident in a Ukrainian victory. Now that is in effect the title of his article. I know we will win, and how. Ukraine's top general on turning the tables against Russia. So when I saw this article, in the interest of being impartial, I said I had to read it and see for myself what Ukraine's plan for a surprise victory is. So after an introductory paragraph, the article begins with an admission by General Syrsky that the Russians are, and I quote, much better resourced. They have more of everything: tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, soldiers.
На даний час можна оцінити як складна. Тобто противник зараз наступає фактично на всій лінії фронту. А ми перейшли від наступальних дій до ведення оборонної операції.
He says that their original 100,000 strong invasion force has now grown to 520,000 with a goal of 690,000 men by the end of 2024. So, explain to me, anyone, or possibly some pro-Ukrainian who has decided to watch this video, how is the West and Ukraine's plan of weakening Russia being fulfilled when you hear these statistics? Where is the evidence of the heavy Russian casualties? How can Russia be taking 4, 5, 600,000 casualties when they started with a mere 100,000 force and it has now blossomed to over 500,000 men in and around Ukraine? How does that work? And you have it here straight from the horse's mouth. General Syrsky has effectively said that despite the so-called heavy casualties, the Russian army has nearly tripled in size from February 2022 when this invasion began. And it doesn't stop there. When it comes to equipment, the general says there is a ratio of 1 to 3 in Russia's favor. Since 2022, Russian tanks have doubled from 1,700 to 3,000. Artillery systems have tripled, and armored personnel carriers have gone up from 4,500 to 8,900. The enemy has a significant advantage in force and resources, the general said. The more I read this article, it seems to me that General Syrskyi apparently wants to switch sides to the Russians, because the majority of this article speaks of how better equipped, better resourced, and better trained the Russian army is compared to the general's own failing army. That it is the man and machine superiority that explains the recent events on the battlefield, as since autumn, he admits the Ukrainian armed forces have been steadily moving backwards. Overall, however, and here's the rebuttal I usually hear from the pro-Ukrainian camp, he said that Russia's creeping victories are merely tactical and local rather than an operational breakthrough. He claims the Russians have not made any significant progress, and then went on to make the usual pro-Ukrainian allegations of Russia suffering heavy losses for small gains. In quotations, General Syrskyi contrasted his battlefield tactics with those used by Russian commanders who are known for sacrificing huge numbers of infantry troops to gain a mere 100 to 200 meters. That obviously is now clearly contradicted by the Ukrainian General Yuri Butusov, who spoke of a 4-mile advance along a railway line toward Pokrovsk in the last 7 days. The Ukrainian general returns then to lauding the Russian military when he says Russia had superior aviation and very strong air defenses, and that because of this, Ukraine was increasingly turning to unmanned aerial systems. We fight not by quantity, but with quality, he said, adding that drones played as big as a role as artillery. Or again, the general is contradicting his own journalist. How could you be focusing on quality over quantity when your own brigades are of such poor quality that their electronic warfare systems are jamming their own drones instead of their enemies? And it wasn't until the very last paragraph of this article that you found anything remotely resembling the title. The general said he had a plan to get back Crimea. So let me just show you this map here. Most, if not all, Ukraine's troops are pinned down on this front line from Zaporizhia that runs all the way up to Belarus, and are retreating day by day in Donetsk, as the general himself admitted. Crimea is all the way down here. This is what the general says he intends to reach somehow. The Guardian then asks the same question that we are all no doubt asking. Was this really feasible? And here's the detailed plan in response. It's feasible, of course. It's a big military secret, the general said. He continues, we will do everything we can to reach the internationally recognized borders of 1991. We have to win to liberate our citizens who are in occupied territories, who are suffering. So there you have it, my friends, Ukraine's plan for victory in this war. Nothing but a concoction of wild hopes and irrational delusion. After effectively admitting that they are completely outgunned, outmanned, and simply out everything needed to maintain and supply a formidable defense in the Donetsk region, the general says in a one-liner that they are going to win and they're going to retake Crimea. Perhaps in the next life he really will do that. Or maybe he has simply succumbed to the same hallucinogens that his president once did. This entire article from The Guardian to me was an absolute nothing burger in terms of any prospect of a Ukrainian victory in this war. It is reflective to me not only of the state of the Ukrainian army, but of US hegemony and NATO's so-called military supremacy. It is nothing but hot air. The reality simply is that the Russian advances are getting bigger and faster, and the Ukrainian defensive lines are crumbling equally as fast. The situation back home in America in their politics is equally as chaotic. When the left's own liberal media publishes articles like this in the New York Times, accusing the Democrats of staging an undemocratic coup to remove President Biden and appoint Kamala Harris.
Are these new green buses going to keep their signature yellow color?
These are going to remain yellow school buses, because who doesn't love a yellow school bus? They will remain yellow, but their heart will be green.
As their nominee, not from the bottom up, but from the top down, and then expect the rank and file to fall in line, as the article described it. It is the playbook that is used by autocratic states. That's what the article says. And I couldn't think of a more scathing attack on the pro-American narrative of spreading democracy to the world through warfare and deception and supposedly standing up to autocratic states who they claim are their enemies. All the lies are now being exposed under the light, both in Ukraine and back home in America. And it seems all these lies are going to culminate in the November date this year.